Well, this is directing animation from the outside. The last session, our first session, which you'll catch on video, it was on directing in from the inside, sort of my day-to-day, the kinds of things that are pressing upon me as an animation director. So that was in part one. In this part, what I wanted to do was target not the people who were interested in getting into animation, but people who want to do animation from the outside, where they're not necessarily artists. They might be producers or writers or working in some other discipline who want to work within the animation industry or outsource animation to produce projects, because animation is such an important art form. And I think it's something that Christians, as filmmakers, we need to get into and be competitive with the entertainment and the media that's happening. I'll just show you a little bit of, of my film Prodigal the Musical. And this one, as we were talking about, this one was a motion capture base in 3D because we didn't have, hold on. This is Prodigal the Musical.
Give me my share. You dare demand your inheritance. My fair share. You wish your father dead. So I ask it not a shekel more. A shekel more. I long to turn away. To be my own man. I long to turn away. From my father's land. I long to turn. I tell you that if they could see me in admirable form, take this their city by storm. I have become far greater than you could ever be. I am the prince of the far country. He's prince of the far country. The ivory prince. Awake, oh ivory prince, who looks down on the dawn. Awake, awake, fragrant hyacinth, to you.
So which is the week you intend to pay your rent?
Okay, wait. Here, take my bracelet. My horse, yes! Take my horse.
Slaughtered weeks ago. How do you think you survived so long in this famine?
Wait, you can't do this to me. Hina, Alfen, Ohola, Oholiva. I must arise. I must arise and go to my Father, and then I will confess. I will confess my sin. Will you take him back? I'm leaving! If he find troublesome kind, if he look upon the prodigal son. I don't know! I don't know! He has every right, he has every right. Don't you think I know? Is there any room for a man like you? I don't know! Leave me alone! My father's house, my father's house. Is there any room? Is there any room?
So that was, we did that with motion capture base. We were trying to figure out how to make the production cycle shorter. And also because it's hard to find good animators who want to work on this kind of project. And so, we used motion capture as a base and then edited off that and then hired animators to come and tweak the motion capture. And, I think one of the most exciting things for us was that we wanted really good music, and we were able to find a great composer, and we selected just on YouTube Broadway actors who we really liked, and we would phone them up and say, look, we got this project, you don't have to audition, you just come in and record these songs, just learn these songs, and we record them, and here's what we would pay you and all this. Every single one of them agreed. They said, you mean we don't have to audition? Okay, sign me up. And so all these people are really named talent in Broadway and some off-Broadway talent and many of them are Christians. The leads are Christian. It was really fun working with that. So we got really good talent. So we were leaning into, so I got into this because I had a producer. We were making some films based on classics, intellectual property. And the financing kept falling through on our projects. And then he came into my room one day and said, and he's an agnostic. He comes into my room one day and says, I want to make a baby Jesus film. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, I think I could get some money for that. I think it'd be fun. Let's make a baby Jesus film. And I was like, oh no. He said, I'll be back in an hour. Tell me how you'll approach it then. And so I opened my Bible and I started going through it, trying to find every reason not to do this film, because for me it's low budget animation. I just had visions of horror of what this thing would be like. It'd be a deal killer, but God sort of put me in a box at that point. And the one thing I found was that in the nativity story in Luke, it's full of Hebrew poetry. And I'm like, because I'm an expository preacher and I want to deal with every part of Scripture, I don't want to just jettison it because it might not fit some preconceived idea. I had to deal with it. I said, the only way I can deal with this Hebrew poetry is to make it a musical. And I thought, that's it. I'll tell him we have to do a musical. We're not musical. He's going to jettison the idea. And so he came back in and said, I told him it has to be a musical. I don't know how I can get around it. We got to find something else to do. And he said, musical? I think I can get more money for that. And he ran back to his office, ran some numbers or whatever he was doing. I don't know what he was doing. He comes back and says, this is great. We can make more more money like this. I can get more financing for this. And he said, start working on the script. And so here I am, non-musical person, writing a musical. And so I just dove into certain musicals that I like because I'm not a musical fan. But I loved Les Mis and I loved some Porgy and Bess and some other shows. And so I just started learning from them. And so since we did that one, which was Promise, Birth of the Messiah, he wanted to do a package. So we needed another musical. And I thought, oh no. And the only thing I could think of was the parable of the prodigal son. I think that might be, because it's so internal. Musicals really work good with internal kinds of dilemmas and conflict, and I thought, let's do that. And so I ended up on that one. But unfortunately, we ran out of money because of some other issues I won't get into, but it's 80% complete, and it's been 80% complete for quite a few years now, so we're still trying to raise money to finish it. But that was motion capture base, just to help us get through that.
Like, what was your major CG program for that? 'Cause I know a big one right now, especially for motion capture stuff, is Unreal. Do you use any Unreal?
Unreal was not developed as well when we started.
That makes sense.
So we were with XSI, and RTD was an XSI programmer, original. So he was able to build an incredible pipeline for us. It still blows me away, the beauty of the pipeline that he made.
Yeah.
But
that CG with your motion capture is a lot better than a lot of like similarly budgeted, I assume, Christian
yes,
animated films.
yeah, it is. In a sense that, like I was saying yesterday, the animator is such an anomaly because you have to know physics, you have to know momentum, you have to know how to breathe life into a character before you even get into performance, right? So you can't even talk to an animator about acting until they have got a lot of groundwork to where they can bring something to life on the screen. And so that's really hard. It takes many years for that kind of thing to happen. And so what the motion capture did was it gave us the physics, right? It gave us just the base to begin working on, and we could select things and then change. And then we give it to the animators, so half of their work was done before. But again, you know, it does have sort of a slow kind of feel to it. There are limitations to motion capture in terms of movement where you don't get that. You have to really fight the system to get real snappy, quick movements. And so that was a big struggle for us, trying to train the animators to break the limitations of motion capture and start thinking like animators and make it look more organic rather than so mechanical. So it's got its weaknesses, and yeah.
Were the singers the same ones that was doing the motion capture?
No, that would be our next project. We were working to get all that work together. So we were building a system that each project was getting better and better, where we would actually have cameras on their faces while they're singing, doing the performances, so that we could marry those two things together. Because that's one thing that you see, is there's a bit of a disconnect between the body and the music sometimes, just because the performers are listening and often responding too late to things. And so we had to fudge a lot of the motion capture, which is, when you start messing with motion capture, if you don't know what you're doing, it gets really ugly very quickly. And so it was a painful process learning how to do that. So, but that's independent animation. There was no studio behind it. We raised our money ourselves with some investors, and we all know that filmmaking itself, independent filmmaking, is a very risky business. It's even riskier when you're doing animation, just because it's more cumbersome. But it's being done, and so that's why I want to begin with, why do you want to produce an animated project? Why do you want to be involved? And I think it's a question you really have to ask yourself. What is animation going to contribute? Why do you need this? Because it is a very long, hard process, but it's also very fun, I have to tell you. I mean, when I get into the realities, I can descend into the darkness, but at the top level, at the end of the day, you're drawing funny pictures, you're doing cartoon characters, you're having a lot of fun. So there's that fun layer that's always there, but there is the underbelly that is very real, and you have to be ready for it. And so a lot of what I have to say is preparing you for that. The current state of the industry right now is that we've just come off a little crest of a resurgence in animation. There's been a lot of 2D animated movies, some 3D animated movies recently, but that's beginning to change. And the reason that's beginning to change is for a number of reasons. But like Netflix, they were one of the major studios behind this resurgence, because they were focused on original content in animation, which is very unusual. Warner Brothers followed suit. Warner Brothers has been very active in 2D animation. HBO Max has been very active, as well as Disney. But all four of these key players are now downsizing their animation. They're cutting their animation. They've started films and they've cut funding for them, even though they've invested millions of dollars in some of these projects. They're not doing them anymore. Disney is going to be laying off 7,000 employees. They announced that a few weeks ago. But that's across the board for them. It's not just animation, it's everything, because they're trying to find profitability in their streaming. And this is why we're facing a downturn, and these are some of the underbelly parts of animation that you have to embrace. It's expensive. Animation is expensive. You can't make a $50,000 film in animation unless it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that. And this is probably the biggest reason, is that there is a long production cycle. If you're doing a series or a feature film, you're looking at 4 to 5 years of time before your investors can beginning to see any kind of recoupment. And investors today don't have the patience for that kind of thing. And the studios have less patience for that thing. So the long production cycle in animation is becoming a problem for them today. Even though that's the way it's always been, today it's becoming less patient. Yep.
Sorry, but is it the same for series? Like,
yeah, I think so.
episode?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So as I said, the studios are struggling to find profit in streaming. I don't understand that, but you know, it's a trial. They're trying to figure out how to make this animal work. And because of all the famine that we've had for the past 15 years or more, where there hasn't been much animation, a lot of animation experts have just left. The craft has departed, you know, and so we're having to rebuild. And fortunately, we're finding students coming out of school that we can reinvest things into to train them to become animators and relearn the craft. So that it is happening. But good animation expertise is scarce. It's not everywhere. But thankfully, like I said, the younger generation that's growing up on the internet and all that, they're finding the resources and they're excited about that kind of thing, and they're sort of keeping things afloat, and there's a promise of another generation to come up that will embrace that. And it's a riskier investment than live action film. But this is why Christian filmmakers need to be pursuing animation. One is the culture is increasingly using animation to indoctrinate our children, and that's going to get worse. And we're going to come to a place where there's not going to be very much that we can show our kids at all that's coming out of the mainstream. The animation is a unique entertainment and communication art form. There is nothing in live action that can do some of the things animation can do. Even in documentaries, if you look at really good documentaries, they lean heavily on motion graphics and animation to help build historical bridges between us and something in the past. They deal with things that are hard to visualize, and they are able to communicate visually things and make things simple and clear and graspable. So it's a really powerful art form other than just kiddie entertainment. It's not just kiddie entertainment. There's a lot more that animation has potential for. And animation's timeless. We all know that. We still watch Disney stuff, the old school stuff. It's fun. We don't want to discredit the fun, because that's why a lot of us get into animation. That is a very real part of it. And Christians want animation. They want animation for their kids, and they've funded projects from Angel Studios and this other company called Pencilish, which is in Nashville. There's some of my friends who are developing that studio there to do some feature animation. So there's Wing Feather Saga, Tuttle Twins, and then what's the other one? The King David movie that's been funded, crowdfunding by Christians. So we see that there's an appetite in our market, which is we have a very profitable market and hungry market for this kind of stuff. So we have to be realistic about the strengths and weaknesses of animation in order to make our investment and our efforts more targeted. We want to lean into the strengths and avoid the weaknesses. So what are those things? First, the weaknesses of animation, as I said, one is the long production cycle, right? You have to have patient investors and patient production people who are interested in being in this in the long term, for long haul. It is expensive because of that. It has very unique technical requirements that you have to have expertise in building a system that's going to support it technically. It has very unique creative requirements because there's a lot of training that goes into being able to do this kind of thing. And there are also talent pool limitations, right? You can build a studio, but if you can't fill the seats with people who can do this stuff and they're qualified to do it, then that's a big problem. And that is a very big struggle, even for our studio, my studio in Montreal, Tonic DNA. We have an active HR department that's looking for the people we need, and they are busy. They are busy going through hundreds, if not thousands of portfolios, just trying to find the people who can do the job for us, right? Yes?
You know, if you can actor, you can go to a casting board or something like that, but if you're trying to find artists, is there a casting board for artists?
No, not really.
How do you find them if you're not a studio?
Well, you post on certain boards, and you broadcast advertisements in the animation magazine for one. There's places where you can advertise, and word gets out because it's a small community. And people talk. It's through the grapevine. This animator heard about this, and he's sharing it with all his friends. You guys got to, because they want to work with each other, right? If they're a community of animators, and they're going to go to, there's this great project we want to go to, he's going to tell all of his animation friends, or her animation friends, to get in there. Strengths of animation. This is what we want to lean into. One is visual design. You can do anything you want in animation. You can build it in 3D, you can draw it. There's no limit to your imagination in animation, and this is what attracts a lot of people to animation. There's no particular style that you have to follow. You can create anything with the tools that we have today. The second strength is pantomime. And I bring that up because that's historically what has been the strength of animation, and it has become even more so today in the sense that pantomime is being able to work in such a way where every gesture, every movement, every head turn, every shoulder raise, every eyebrow lift or whatever, you can design it in such a way that it works in pantomime so that it reads very well. And because we have so much control in animation, we're working frame by frame. We're not like actors who don't really know. They know the camera's sort of over there. They don't know if they're hitting the poses as strong enough. We can push those poses so that they are the strongest, clearest bits of movement and action that we can achieve. And so that's what it really thrives on, is that kind of pantomime. And that leads into the third one, which is caricature. It's great at caricaturing life. If you know 101 Dalmatians, where Roger's looking out the window at the beginning and he's watching these dogs with their owners walk by and they each mirror. That's the beauty of animation. That's a strength of animation that is very hard to achieve in live action, unless you've got Jim Carrey as your actor. You know, he's one of the only actors who can do animation, you know, in his own life. So it's a very, very limited skill set. As I said, there's no limits to your imagination, and animation tends to be more evergreen. It's more long-lasting, and the audience doesn't date itself so much, and so those are the strengths of animation. There are a variety of animation styles. There's the traditional Disney mainstream hand-drawn stuff. There's cartoony Warner Brothers. There's limited animation like the Flintstones and Scooby-Doo and of the old school days, but today we've sort of transformed that into 2D puppet. So a 2D puppet is a build of drawings that are rigged together to move, and then it does interpolation and it acts very much like a puppet. So those things, that's another style that's been very popular in TV today, and series work. There's anime. I'm not such a great fan of anime. It doesn't entertain me, but there are some things about anime that allow you to tell a story with just visual images, beautiful images juxtaposed to one another that you don't see in a lot of other animations. So there are some unique qualities to anime. And so as a style, not as what's been done, but as a style, there's a lot of potential in that. Very limited animation though. And then there's European animation, which is the latest European animated films I've seen. They could be live action films, but they decided to animate them, and that's sort of the ethos of the European stuff. It doesn't necessarily fit the traditional way of understanding. And you probably never heard of them, so I won't even mention the films, but there have been some interesting films that have come out of the European animation. They've got a really strong animation industry over there. And beyond style, then there's techniques, and I've touched a little bit on them. There's hand-drawn, there's 3D, there's 2D puppet, there's stop motion, there's limited. I mean, the tools today allow you to do all kinds of things, and you could even come up with new styles today. But there's different techniques that are cheaper, more affordable, quicker in production, and some that are longer. So how to approach an animated project? First, you got to ask, what budget do you have? You got to be very realistic about your budget and very careful about what you're planning to spend. What's the animation style? That's going to be determined by the budget potentially. Same with the technique. How long of a schedule are you willing to bear? What compromises can you make in terms of the budget or the schedule or the quality? Where are you willing to cut corners to fit your budget? Because most of us don't have enough of a budget to do everything, right? And you want to play to animation strengths. And when you get to the place where you're casting your artists and your production people, you want to cast them well, because your production is not going to rise above their ability. It's not going to suddenly magically take on some wings that let it rise above who those people are. I mean, it's a very, what happens generally is when people get together, the artists, you have some really highly talented ones, you have some who are more on the junior level, and so the median just sort of brings everything down, so that's just a reality of it in any kind of human endeavor, but it's very, very apparent in animation. And then you're obviously going to be evaluating costs, schedule, what kinds of requirements you're going to need for this kind of production with its pipeline and everything. And so whatever your assumptions are, once you hire your experts, your leads, you need to check those assumptions with them, because usually you're off. So the question today, and it's a very good question, if you're planning on doing a project, do you build a studio or do you outsource things to a supplier, right? The big studios now no longer really do their own productions because it's extremely costly to do any kind of animated production in Los Angeles. Because of the unions, because of the high cost of living, because of the expectations of the animation people there, they can't get those kinds of costs down. And that's why they're going outside of the United States to find suppliers, or going overseas. And I think, we can learn some things from what those studios are doing. So, studio versus supplier. The studio, if you build your own studio, you're going to have more creative and technical control. You're going to have to build your own pipeline. Pipelines are very difficult to build. They require a lot of people, a lot of information going into a team of people building out exactly what you need for the kind of film you can do. So you can tailor your pipeline better to your production. You're going to have HR. You're going to have to be crewing all the time, because people come and people go in animation. The crew you start out with is not necessarily the crew you finish with sometimes. You have studio overhead. And if you're in it for the long haul, you've got to feed that machine. Otherwise, animators are sitting there doing nothing, drawing paychecks. And then they get antsy because if they don't have any work to do, they're going to jump ship and go someplace else that does have work for them because they don't like sitting around doing nothing. Now, if you go with a supplier, those can be more project-based, right? So you have a specific project, you hire a supplier for that. This is what the big studios do. But you have less control over things because you're at a distance. You're using somebody else's resources and team and pipeline that they've built, and so can be a good thing, or it can be a bad thing. You have to choose your supplier well. You have no overhead. The pipeline and talent is generally plug and play. They're ready to roll. They can gear up or crew up within a few weeks or a month. And you don't have to deal with any studio overhead, so there's a lot of benefit to that. And today there's so many studios popping up all over the place doing things. It's hard for me to follow. I can't follow them all. And there's some really talented things happening in many studios, but there's also a lot of studios that don't have the culture doesn't have the animation background and history to where they have people who are talented enough to understand what's happening and how to do animation well. They have lots of enthusiasm, but they can't make deadlines and they can't meet the quality that you're looking for often. So you have to be very careful what the supplier you're using. So if you're building your own studio, the most important thing is that you hire experts. You hire people who are qualified to do the job. You don't want to hire people who are sort of, they'd like to do that, they sort of done this thing, but then they might be able to do this. Enthusiasm only gets you so far when you don't have the know-how. You really need people who know how to do things. Otherwise, it's going to cost you dearly, and it's going to cost your crew. And then you yourself, you may not have any training, but strive to learn. Strive yourself to be an expert. You may never be an expert, but if you're growing into that direction, you're going to be learning a lot. That's going to be very helpful for you. Prepare for worst case scenarios. In my experience, the worst case is usually what happens. Everything takes twice as long as you expect, and everything costs twice as much as you expect. So you got to be prepared for those inevitabilities. And be prepared to train your talent, especially in today's environment. You get a lot of people coming in, they've got a little bit of skill, and they might have great portfolios and whatever, but once you start working with them, you start seeing right through their real you see their weaknesses, and they often have a lot. And so you need to, you don't want to keep firing people or laying people off and bringing new people in, because then that creates other problems. So at some point you have to pick your battle and use what you've got, and you do your best to train them. So be prepared to train your talent. And right now, I mean, there's so many resources online where you can be paying your crew and you provide them resources that they go train during downtime. That's what we do right now. So we have a lot of online resources that we tap into. And brace yourself for a lot of HR problems. You got in this to do fun animation, and then you got problems with this person's becoming toxic, this animator's having these problems, and you're bewildered by HR. I mean, if you worked in HR in any kind of company or whatever, you realize how valuable those HR people are that you hire to manage the crew and those kinds of things. People want vacation time, they're sick or whatever. There's just a lot of HR problems. Don't do it all yourself. Don't do this all yourself. Unless you're just a solo entrepreneur doing something, you really have to think about what can you realistically do? What do you realistically want to spend your time doing? Because even producers who are bringing in investment and whatever, they want to do this, they want to do that, they can save money by doing that, but they get burnt out and they realize I've created more problems by trying to do things myself, right? So you don't want to get yourself in that kind of a situation. And then you're going to have a weather eye towards the next project. When this project wraps, or when your project goes out of production into production, what are those pre-production people going to be doing? They're going to be sitting around, you're going to lay them off. Some of them are going to be good, you're going to want to keep them. What are they going to be doing? You got to be thinking about overlapping these projects so that you're feeding the machine with content. Now, if you're working with an animation supplier, and I've had a lot of experience doing this, choose your supplier well, because your supplier can sink you or they can be your savior. And usually you get one or the other. It's very rare that it's in the middle. They can make your life misery. And where it's appropriate, if you have a really good supplier, make them a collaborator so that they're able to step in and increase they can use their creative value to help you increase your project's quality. You're going to have to decide who is controlling your creative. How much of that creative control are you giving to your supplier? How much are you keeping it for yourself? Now, the big studios that I've worked with, they will do the design, they'll do the script writing, they do the audio recording, they give you the edits with the animatics and the storyboards. And so basically we receive this package from them, and then we execute the animation and the backgrounds and whatever else we have to do on that, from that package. And then we're constantly sending them stuff to review, they're giving us feedback. So they're basically directing from a distance. My position is to act as not the negotiator, but the director who's in between, to make sure that the vision of what the animation directors there want, I make sure our team is giving that. And then I check our team and I act knowing what they want. If they're not getting what they want, I keep it in among my animators and my team until I see, okay, that's exactly what they want. We're going to send it to them for approval. So they control the creative, but I am sort of the interface for them to our studio creatively. Police your creative. So usually that's the model that happens, is that if you're going to go to a studio to say, I want to do this animated film, I've got this project, I've got this script, you're going to build a little creative team on your side that's going to be developing exactly what you want. You're going to be working with them with the audio, with the actors, with the storyboards and the animatics, and then the design, and then you're going to send that off. I've been in situations where the studios have expected us to police their creative, which is a weird position to be in. They'll make retakes after retakes after retakes and make these changes that are costly. And so we're recording all those retakes, calculating how much impact that's going to have on the schedule and the budget, and then sending it back to their producers for approval. And that's what they don't expect that. Many of them think, well, we're a big studio, we can do whatever we want, you're going to do everything we say. And so they tend to have, they act more like bulls to the animation supplier sometimes, but I've worked with really good ones, so I know what working for a really good one is and working for some really bad ones are. So you have to police your creative to make sure they're not overburdening the supplier, so that you don't burn them out. Because many studios, especially in visual effects, they'll work on a project and they're just burned by the studios, and they end up going bankrupt at the end of the show. So studios have actually bankrupted somebody else's visual effects studio because they didn't police their creative and they had too many expectations. So this is one of my key points. Working with Hollywood, working with independent filmmakers or whatever, respect the craft. You have to respect the craft of animation, especially when you don't understand it. Even the big studios, often they have people in charge who don't understand the craft of animation. And when you don't respect the craft, then you're trampling it. So you have to be very, very careful. This is a lesson for everybody in animation who's outsourcing stuff. To respect the craft is to respect the pipeline. We have a very particular pipeline that we need and we develop so that we get the most efficiency and most quality and most sanity in our production. Yet the studios come to us and they force their pipeline, which is often based on a live action pipeline or a visual effects pipeline, and we're like, no, 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 no. This is how an animation pipeline works. And they will say, nope, you're going to do our pipeline. And so we have to hire more people, more production managers, more tech people to facilitate that engagement between the studio pipeline and our pipeline so that the client is happy. So it creates a lot more work for us. It complicates things no end. And in the end, it costs them because we're struggling harder to meet their deadlines and struggling harder to reach their creative goals. And they don't see that. That's the funny thing, is they can't see how when they burden a studio with their pipeline, it creates problems for them and it gives them a poor quality product at the end. So to respect the craft is to respect the pipeline. It's also to respect the limitations. We can't do everything. In one of our last projects, the director wanted us to move a camera, and not just move it like a pan, physically move it in 3D space. And we told them, okay, we can do that, but we have to redraw everything. We have to scrap what we've done. We'll start from the beginning, do the new layouts, new animation, new cleanup, new paint, ink and paint, new compositing, because we had already delivered it. And they didn't understand that. Because we're working in 2D, everything we do is drawn. You can't just move a camera. Well, you can do that in 3D. I don't know why we're using 2D animation. It's an archaic art form and all this. And we're like, well, you know, you're not respecting the limitations of our craft. This is our pipeline. This is the limitations of 2D. So even the big studios don't understand the nature of the limitations that we have in whatever technique you're using. So you got to respect the limitations of what the craft is. We're always about cutting corners. We're always trying to find ways to make things faster, to get things into production sooner. Because people are sitting around, we got to get them busy. Why don't we just jump into this and do this now? And then, you know, if we have to respond later and make some corrections, that's better than having people sit around. Well, there's a cost to that. And often those costs exceed what you gained at the beginning, right? So you have to cut corners wisely, and you do that by listening to your production team. Because some things might be easy for even me in animation. I could say, yeah, I could do those changes. That's not a big deal. But for our production team, they have to run that through all of our pipeline, through all of our tracking software, and rebuild things and reset some certain communication. And it's a big deal for them. And so we have to, as an animation director, even though I can do it creatively, it doesn't mean it's good for production. And so I got to listen to my production people when they say, we can't do that. That's just too much. Control your creative. I already talked about that. And be committed to the project. You know, you have to really be resolved to see this thing through to the end and suffer the bumps and the pain, because there will be bumps and pain in every production. That's just the nature of it. And in animation, that pain is in slow motion. And you get weary very quickly in that kind of environment. Keep a tight grip on your goal, because all of the problems that you're going to face are going to cloud that goal, and you're going to start losing sight and woe is me kind of thing. You want to make sure that you're keeping the spirit alive of what you want to do. and then bathe your effort in prayer, because you need the Lord in this industry to survive and to keep your spirits up and to keep you on track. And if you're on track, you've got to keep everybody else on track. If you're the producer, you're the last go-to. You're the one saying, hey man, this is just a cartoon. This is a good thing we're doing, and in spite of these problems, we're going to survive. It's all okay. And you're setting the tone and temperament for your team when you're doing that. So, are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
And I'm not, but you were just saying bathe. I was thinking before you even said it, I thought, this man is navigating his industry, and it's like the screw tape letters, or, I mean, there's a prayer warrior, going on, praying and stuff. Could you expound a little more about how you bathe in prayer, maybe some of the things, the ways that you do that?
Well, I mean, when you're faced with problems and things that seem insurmountable, unfortunately, I don't do it every day. I probably should, and I don't always do it as well. But when problems come up, that's usually when you go to the Lord, right? And how can I get through this, Lord? I don't know what's going on here, but we need some solutions, because I don't see any solutions right now. Or give me the strength to confront this person and see what is the right course of action in dealing with this other individual. There's all kinds of problems, and so I've seen my studio has floundered, it's struggled, it's lost people, and you get into a situation where your team is just a lot of juniors who, they mean well, they love you love them, but they're just not able to do what you want to do, and you're just like, my vision is landing on the floor, and it's picking up all the soot, So you have to expect those bad things, and like in anything, even in live action production, you have to do that. Production is always a war. It really is a series of one battle after another, and the Lord doesn't always bless all of your projects. I mean, you get in projects that fail. That's just normal. If you're in film, you're going to fail. You're going to be on projects that aren't going to pay you. Everybody has those experiences, whether they're Christians or not, and you got to be ready for them. That's just the nature of this industry. And that's the reality of this industry, and you have to have the fortitude to weather that storm. And a lot of animators and even filmmakers, they just stay in film because they don't know what else to do. I mean, realistically, if you're looking at the tea leaves of everything and you're like, I need to get out of this industry. This is not supporting me, but what am I going to do? That's the one thing that often keeps many of them afloat. But those are all the negative things. Positive things do happen. I don't want to say that they don't. I mean, the last 6 years, God has blessed me to put me in a position where I am directing stuff for some of the biggest studios in Los Angeles. And I don't know how I got there. It's only the work of God who brought me there to give me this opportunity to work on these things. And I've learned a lot working with these studios. I've learned good things, I've learned bad things, but the Lord's working on me, and He uses suffering. This is one thing I've learned. One thing I've learned in life is that God uses suffering to shape us. And sometimes that suffering is hard, very hard suffering. I mean, I've spent years on a project where I wasn't getting paid. I wasn't paid for 2 years, basically. And we were going through all of our savings and everything. And I was like, should I leave? This is not working. But I had invested so much in this project, in pre-production and writing, and poured, many years getting that thing to that place. So do you just abandon it at that point? At what point? There's a balancing act between what you do. How do you survive this? And things often go badly. And, but then there's other things where things go well, and you suddenly look around and you're going, wow, these people I'm working with now are just amazing talents. I never in my life thought I'd be working with some of these people. And I'm hiring them and I'm directing them, and You know, where when I was younger, I was looking up to them like, I wish I was as good as Mike Surrey. And you know, now I'm able to call Mike Surrey and say, hey Mike, I got a project, you want to work on it? And so that kind of thing is there are lots of highs in that sort of thing. So yes.
I have, it's a little more practical than spiritual,
Yep.
but you talked about you can't make an animation for $50,000 unless you want like 5 minutes.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever heard of Bluey.
Bluey, no.
Bluey. So my kids love it. It's very successful.
Oh.
It's Australian, but it's on.
They're doing some amazing stuff in Australia.
Okay. So it's 8-minute episodes.
Yeah.
Parents love that because they're not sitting there watching 2 hours of TV. You can watch one 8 minutes and be done,
Yep.
or you can watch 5 episodes.
Yep.
And they're all very moving, and each has its own lesson.
Yeah.
Can you kind of speak to that strategically? Do you think that that's purposefully to like save money or save the long?
Well, I've never seen Bluey, but I can imagine. There's a lot of ways that you can cost cut, and when you get down to that level of cost cutting, then it becomes more of a performance rather than an art necessarily. And I don't mean that to disparage what they're doing, because there is a performance base where it's driven by human motion or puppets or whatever, hand puppets, that will cost cut. But I'm speaking from a place where I'm serving the major studios. I'm doing as high quality of animation as we can. Sometimes cutting things back, but the reality of any kind of mainstream level animation like that I'm old school. So I speak from that world. So I don't really understand that. Animation's big.
Right.
There's so much that can be done, and there's so many tools available. And if somebody has some way of doing something technically to save money and it's meeting an audience need, that's great.
Yeah.
That's.
I did see in an interview the actors said that they actually have never met for like 3 seasons because they filmed from home.
Yes.
They recorded from home.
Yes. Yeah. That doesn't surprise me. Yeah. I mean, there's lots you can do nowadays. I mean, our studio, half our studio is outside the studio, And when winter comes in Montreal, a lot of our employees go home and they work remotely because they don't want to deal with the weather, having to travel in the weather. So yeah, remote now. Things have changed so much since COVID, and a lot of it's been bad, but there's been a few good things, and being able to work remotely with the kind of tools that we have nowadays, it's just amazing. Because before, I would have to find animators and we would have to fly them and put them up in Montreal to work on our projects. But now I can have my team all over the world. And when I was working on some of these other projects, I would get up early. First thing in the morning, I'd check my feed, and I'm looking at the stuff that the guys from Turkey did. And then before I go to bed, I'm checking my feed because I have to review the stuff my guys in Los Angeles were doing. So that's a great benefit. I don't have to bring those people in. I can just call them up, ship them a computer, or IT people fix their computer so that they have the security we need. Because when we're working for the big studios, there's certain protocols, security protocols you got to put in place. So yeah.
You're talking about like times where like God kind of pushes you toward a certain project. Have you ever had it like the other way around, where He pushes you off of one? Or
has He ever pushed me off a project? I mean, I've had projects presented to me. They weren't, because when you're doing advertising, we were doing a lot of advertising as well. I've done hundreds of commercials. Certain projects come in, and even my producer, who's not a Christian, he'll look at it and, we can't do that. We can't do that. And so he just fluffs it off. Sometimes he'll show me because it's sort of borderline, and I'll just go, no, sorry. But yeah, I was offered another project as well that was sort of promoting transgender acceptability, and that's, I said no. I just refused to do that. But has He pushed me off? I guess you could say He pushed me off Prodigal. At 80%, you're going to get to 80%, and then 6 years, 7 years, who knows how long it's going to take for us to get that thing back up and running.
Crowdfunding it at all?
We haven't. My producer has been pursuing different opportunities, and it just takes a long time to find that. And he has looked at crowdfunding. He's actually contacted Angel Studios. I'm sort of on the fence about that, but the contracts were not necessarily suitable for us because we have so many different clients, and Angel wants you to all the projects they get like first. All the following projects you do, they want first look, and we can't do that because we already have an existing client base of stuff. So, yeah.
So if a scriptwriter was coming to an animator to pitch their script, would a graphic novel be a good way to present your script?
Yeah.
And
Today, IP is king. So if you have a novel, if you have a graphic novel, those are more interesting to the bigger studios. They want to have some existing IP. We've had studios come to us and say, hey, look, you guys want to develop something from our IP? We'd love to hear it. So they've sort of given us an open door. Go look at our stuff, pitch it to us, and we'll see if we want to do that. I mean, it's not a guarantee that they would do it, but today they're afraid. Hollywood runs on fear, and they want to secure as much of their investment as possible. So if they can do something with an existing IP, it's already got a built-in marketing base, fan base, whatever, and they like that. The original content, it's a bit sketchier, and it's harder for them to do. And they have been dropping a lot of original content now because it's just too risky for them as a feeding into their production mindset.
How would you create a graphic novel? Like, would you go search for somebody or try to make it yourself?
Well, it depends on your artistic skills. There's a huge, like in Montreal, there's a huge graphic novel base. They call bande dessinée. That's what they call graphic novels, and in France as well. So there's lots of artists who are willing to do that. If you got money, you have to pay them, and it's going to be costly because it takes a long while to do a graphic novel. But if you can do it yourself, that's a good thing. But it's not necessarily a guarantee, but it does give you one source of income. It gives you an ownership to that IP, and it gives you an opportunity to build awareness, build an audience, and then go to the studio studio and try to pitch it.
So
Yeah.
would that be more likely to run through than like a pitch Bible of an original idea?
Not necessarily. You can do pitch Bibles, and you have to have a good relationship. Again, they're very nervous about working with people who don't have experience, right? Or any track record in animation. It's been very hard for us, even though we've been in animation for 30 years, 20 years, whatever, with our team doing great stuff and delivering projects. That's a very important part. It's been hard for us to pitch original content, but we're doing it. But we're also doing existing IP, so that's going to probably have more of a success quicker than our existing content. I mean, our original content. So, but again, it's changing all the time. Then I hear somebody say, well, now they're looking for new writers and new ideas and this, and I'm like, who knows what? The main thing is, what are you passionate about, and go for it, because your passion and your drive towards something has value, right? And so if you're trying to read what's going on in the studio system and what they're buying and what they're expecting, usually you're going to be chasing your tail. You got to be wise about it, but you also have to be passionate about it. So.